Greetings, comrades of the Black is Back Coalition and all other webinar attendees. I'm Brother Yusef, a member of the JOKO Collective, which is itself a member organization of the Black is Back Coalition. And I want to express my gratitude to the organizers of the webinar for allowing me to make this video so that the JOKO Collective could participate in this really critical webinar. The message is still the same. Drop the charges. Drop the charges against the African People's Socialist Party leadership. Drop the charges against the African People's Solidarity Committee leadership. This has been a long tactic of the state and of civil society interest to put the agency for African resistance somewhere external to African experience, African analysis, African understanding. Funny thing though, people typically don't need to be told who's oppressing them when they're being oppressed. It sounds a little bit like, don't believe your lying eyes, believe me. After watching Chairman Omali's address to the International Congress in Huelva, Spain from 2007, a couple of things stand out to me. First of those is that paradox of modernity, right? The paradox that describes this period as a period of human progress. And that might indeed be the case if we're looking at Europe, and particularly Western Europe, and its satellite settler states around the world. But that progress, that development of Europe has meant the underdevelopment, in fact, the destruction of African societies, First Nations societies, lives of millions of people over hundreds of years. European development has meant underdevelopment of Africa, the Americas, the South Pacific, various parts of Asia, except insofar as they are brought into the capitalist economies in the various urban centers. And then that is seen as development insofar as these societies take on European mores, European style, European look, design, etc. As the empire of the West, the empire of capital, has been voracious in its reach around the world and intends to hold on to that with an iron grip. What the address from 2007 demonstrates is just how long the chairman, the party, the African People's Socialist Party, and the African people, period, have historically resisted our oppression, identified our oppressors, and have offered alternatives to our people that go beyond integration or assimilation into the European societies, which are held up as really the only path of development. We have to question what kind of development that is. a society that has been responsible for the degradation of so many peoples around the world. Indeed, the very degradation and life-threatening practices of the earth itself, right? That we live in a period of climate change that's completely and absolutely related to the development of colonial capitalism as it becomes the global political economy of the world. So this history of repressing African speech, right, in the country of free speech is as old as this country, and even older if we want to look at the British period, the Spanish period, depending on which state you're in, the Dutch period, depending on which state you're in, the French period, depending on which state you're in. One brief example, the work of David Walker, who worked as a journalist and, of course, who produced that great work, David Walker's Appeals, appealing to the colored citizens of the world, which is the language he uses, but especially and most specifically those of the United States. This was repressed, right? His speech, his use of the quote-unquote free press, such that within a year of the publication of his appeals, his body is found on his doorstep. So there's nothing new about the suppression of free speech in the country that declares itself the protector of civil liberties and free speech around the world, yet has never effectively practiced that, allowed the African nation within this imperial nation or the other internal colonies of the United States to freely express both critique and analysis of this exploitative relationship, but instead continues to promote itself with the greatest propaganda machine the world has created, as the defender of freedom. What do they call themselves? Leaders of the free world. It's an old trope, right? The outside agitator, the idea that somebody else needs to tell Africans that they're being mistreated, that it's these abolitionists from the North, those free blacks over there who are infecting our slaves with these ideas. It's the Russians, it's the Chinese, it's the British, it's anybody but black people recognizing their own condition, being able to offer an analysis of that, which is one of the most critical interventions of the African People's Socialist Party. The analysis it is able to offer of the history of the modern world, the role of colonialism in upholding the capitalist system, and the role of neocolonialism in extending that system to try to squeeze as much of the juice out of this black berry that they can get. The outside agitator, right? Those socialists over there, those Russians over there, the Chinese over here, the Japanese over there, but never the African being able to figure that out on one's own. Old trope. We recognize that trope we reject that trope. Key point, key takeaway from Chairman Omali's address. Africa doesn't need charity. Africa needs solidarity. And Africans need solidarity. And Africans need to demonstrate solidarity with the Uhuru movement, with the African People's Socialist Party, with the African People's Solidarity Committee. Demand that these charges are dropped and that free speech be allowed to flourish. I mean, it raises a question for me. I mean, all these folks are talking about, all any of us are talking about is freedom for Black people on our own terms, not terms determined by someone else. Why, in the country that calls itself the leader of the free world, is Black freedom so dangerous? Black independence so dangerous? African sovereignty so dangerous? Working class leadership so dangerous? Why is freedom so dangerous to the people who say they love freedom? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I guess it never really did make a whole lot of sense when you fight a revolution that's for the equality and freedom of all men and women, though we know they didn't say women. And yet at every turn, state and civil society powers are working overtime to suppress the freedom of Africa and Africans and our right and ability to determine our own futures. Because we are not people who chose to be here. We are descendants of people who are brought to these Americas as chattel, and some of us who have been forced to follow our resources to these places because the system keeps Africa underdeveloped as long as it remains connected to this global system. The system ain't for us. It's only about using us to prop it up. So again, we say the message is the same. Drop the charges. Hands off Uhuru. Hands off Africa. Uhuru.